G'day, ZiggyD here, and welcome back for another Path of Exile guide. One of the most common questions I get about my explosive arrow character is how do you actually have good single target damage? Various people have been trying explosive arrow, and it's very easy to feel like early on that it's impossible to get decent single target damage with an explosive arrow setup. The thing is, explosive arrow can actually have incredibly good single target damage. It just requires the leveraging of several different little tricks. So the first way to get good single target damage on an explosive arrow setup is to have an ignite setup. This is one of the easiest, simplest ways to get good single target damage, and it can even be combined with the later methods I'll go over to even further amplify your single target potency. This method uses a single powerful explosion to create a powerful ignite that burns down the enemy. The core of this setup is to use an explosive arrow, preferably quality, because quality gives chance to ignite on the gem, 20% for 20% quality. Then you're going to use Chance to Ignite, which further increases the chance of igniting the enemy, and you can use Flammability Curse on the same enemy as well to further increase the chance to ignite. With all of these things stacked on top of each other, you have a very good chance of igniting a target with a single explosion. On top of that, we're going to focus on scaling that single hit of damage as much as possible. So you're going to use things like Concentrated Effect and Fire Penetration. Your basic falling setup for an ignite single target on an explosive arrow character is going to be a quality explosive arrow, chance to ignite, Concentrated Effect, and Fire Penetration. If you happen to have a 5 or a 6 link, you can add in a few other options. You can use Increased Burning Damage, you can use Slower Projectiles to further increase the single hit damage, and you can use Faster Attacks to more quickly stack up those 5 stacks. Now the way you use this single target ignite setup is to simply shoot 5 fuses of this single setup into the rare mob or the boss that you want to single target down. Then just before it explodes, because you have that 1 second delay, curse them with Flammability. The enemy should then hopefully be ignited, and the ignite will burn them down. You could then use your other AoE setup to deal further damage to them. Now a bit of a trick that you can take advantage of in this single target ignite setup is to take advantage of explosive arrow's snapshotting mechanic. The first fuse that hits an enemy will dictate what sort of explosion damage is actually dealt to the enemy. So, let's say you have a boss, and you shoot your single target ignite-based explosive arrow setup 1 fuse into that target. You then stack him with 4 more fuses of your AoE setup or your GMP setup. Now your GMP setup does a lot less single target damage, but it's much easier to actually connect with the target, and at the same time you can stack fuses into any targets around your primary target. So what this means is if you get that first fuse into the enemy of your single target setup, you can then follow up with an AoE setup, and you'll still be able to 5 stack it up to increase the potency of that single target ignite based explosion, at the same time as having a bunch of extra explosions proc around the enemy. This is actually the most efficient way to play explosive arrow, to proc that 1 single fuse into the enemy and then stack it with your AoE setup. This is especially helpful if you have faster attacks on your AoE setup, but not your single target setup as well, because it will be actually faster to 5 stack them with the fuses if you use this method. The next strategy for dealing with single targets on an explosive arrow build is to use the overlapping of explosions present in your main attack. So generally, explosive arrow is going to be using greater multiple projectiles to shoot out 5 projectile fuses that will stick on a bunch of different targets and create a bunch of explosions. The most damage that is dealt in this sort of impact-based explosive arrow build is by the overlapping of these explosions, so each target is hit by multiple explosions, dealing a large amount of total damage to them. Now, if you have a rare or a boss surrounded by other enemies, then what you can do is you can just stack up your 5 fuses on enemies around them, and the explosions will overlap, dealing a ton of damage to the single target. A lot of the time, any rares surrounded by enemies, which is nearly all of the time, will be killed by the explosions just on the surrounding enemies. You can take advantage of this mechanic as well by drawing any fast-moving rares or bosses into packs of enemies to stack up with explosions. Another trick that every explosive arrow player should know like the back of their hand is wall overlapping. Any targets near walls can be taken advantage of by firing your fuses into the actual walls. You can fire at the target as well if you want, or you can just be standing near the wall yourself and stack up your fuses on the wall. Some walls are a little easier than others, and corners can be even easier. But if you can draw a target near a wall, or if they're already positioned somewhere close enough to a wall for you to be able to do this, you can deal incredible amounts of single target damage just by all of these explosions happening on top of them. You should take advantage of this whenever you can, and it actually is a mechanic that makes explosive arrow builds really shine on indoor maps like Catacombs. The final trick of the trade is using Frost Wall. Frost Wall at the time of recording is a little bit buggy with this method, but can still be used to further amplify your single target damage. Say that there's no walls near the enemy and you've used your ignite setup already and they're burning down, but you want to add a little bit of extra damage there, or maybe you don't have an ignite setup, then you can actually throw a Frost Wall down and then fire arrows into it to proc a bunch of extra explosions. Now it worked pretty well this time, but sometimes explosions won't occur. Like you saw, some explosions didn't occur there, and sometimes it can be a little hard to actually stick the fuses in the wall. The reason for this is that the wall is actually basically a bunch of little targets, and because of the mechanics regarding projectile shotgunning in Path of Exile, only one fuse can hit one of those targets. So if you stand too close to the Frost Wall, then most of your arrows will actually fly through, and you'll see I only get one fuse into there. So the key is to be standing a little bit further away from the Frost Wall, and I also find it helpful if you fire at it from a slight angle as well, because then you're more likely to hit each of the targets. In fact, you can even fire on it from pretty much at the side, and you'll be able to guarantee that you at least get some stacks there. So the idea is to simply spam the Frost Wall on top of the target. If it's not a fast-moving target, you can put the Frost Wall just behind them and stack an extra fuse in the target itself. But if it is a fast-moving target that represents a bit of a higher danger to you, then you can actually stick the Frost Wall in front of them to stop them from getting to you, and as they try to walk around the Frost Wall, you can stack it up with explosions, dealing extra damage to them. So rather than hitting them with just one fuse, like you would if you fired directly at them, the Frost Wall allows you to get maybe two fuses worth of explosions, maybe even 3 or 4 or 5 if you happen to get lucky with the sections of the wall that you hit. So once you learn all of these different tactics and really integrate them into your play, you can actually start to combine them to great effect to really quickly clear out single targets in maps. My typical strategy is to first take advantage of any walls positioned near the mob. If they're not near a wall, but they're near a bunch of other targets, then I'll use my AoE setup to deal with all of the extra targets at the same time as damaging the single target. If they're still alive after that, or if they're not positioned near any other enemies, then I'll use my single target ignite setup, curse them with Flammability and get that powerful ignite. I'll then finally, if they're still alive, follow up with a Frost Wall and hit them with the extra explosions from my AoE target to finish them off. So hopefully this video has helped you guys increase the magnitude of your explosive arrow shenanigans. If you guys have any questions or comments, leave them below the video. That is it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.